When talking about poetry or reading or movies or anything really, I think that there is something to be said for expanding the market, for taking what it is that is the core elemental product, if you will, in this case, poetry itself, and making that thing into something that is palatable for a larger group of people. Charles Bukowski does that. Bluebird, in my opinion, especially does that. You can take Bluebird to anyone working a 9 to 5 job, sit it in front of them, and they can connect with this poem. Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we are here for another poetry discussion, which will appear in 3 playlists here on the channel. Number 1 being 30 must-read poems in celebration of National Poetry Month. Number 2 being the Bukowski playlist here on the channel, and number 3 being the Poetry Discussion playlist. This video will have 3 separate sections. The first being a quick biography of Charles Bukowski. The second being a recap, kind of, an exploration, if you will, of the type of poetry that Charles Bukowski wrote. And the third is an analysis of the poem in question. So, who was Charles Bukowski? Charles Bukowski, good old Chucky Buck, born Henry Charles Bukowski, or more accurately Heinrich Karl Bukowski, in 1920 in Andernach, Prussia, the Weimar Republic. Sounds kind of strange if you know him as the beatnik poet who cursed and drank and caroused in California, but you're wrong. You're also wrong because he wasn't a beatnik, at least he said he wasn't, and he was born in Germany because his father, Heinrich, was part of the American occupying force in the Germanic territories after World War I, and he, being of German descent, decided to stick around afterward. The elder Heinrich had been a sergeant for the United States Army and got his friend's sister pregnant. Now, we're getting a little bit closer to the Bukowski that we know. That sister was known as Katharina Fett, not related to Boba. And obviously, the baby resulting from that pregnancy was Charles Bukowski. In 1923, the family would move to the United States, Baltimore, Maryland, to be more specific. It seems that the family had difficulty making it, and if we're to take Charles' word for it, probably because his father had trouble finding work, or trouble keeping work, or trouble just going to work. And when Charles was 10, they moved to Los Angeles. The city may have been new, but his father wasn't. Bukowski often talked about his father's abusive behavior, and we're left to wonder if this is where the rough side of Bukowski comes from. If we are to take Charles Bukowski's poem A Smile to Remember as autobiographical, then his mother was the type to try to be positive regardless of circumstance. And while that sentiment does not track precisely into Bukowski's poetry, it's not that hard to imagine the disposition, smiling through the pain, translating into Bukowski's hallmark aloof attitude toward the outside world. If his father ruined his home life, it seems that acne wreaked havoc on his social life. The young Bukowski suffered from what was called acne vulgaris, which was actually so bad that he would receive regular medical treatments. Facing abuse at home and no comfort away either, Bukowski said he turned to alcohol. At 13 years old. By the time he was in his early 20s, he was writing and had some success getting short stories published, but apparently it was not enough success to keep his attention, and he quit writing and spent a decade sometimes working, sometimes traveling, and usually drunk. In 1948, he met Jane Cooney Baker, who was 10 years his senior and one of the loves of his life. They would sometimes live together. And by the mid-1950s, he was writing again, perhaps inspired by a near-death experience due to an ulcer. And by the late 50s, he was finding regular publication in smaller and upstart magazines. And in 1960, Bukowski's poem His Wife, the Painter, was published as a broadside. Later that year, he would see further success with a chapbook of poems titled Flower, Fist, and Bestial Whale, sent to press in October. In 1962, Jane Cooney Baker died. It was a loss that devastated Bukowski seemingly for the rest of his life. In 1963, he met Francis Dean Smith, a fellow poet known as Franci, and the following year, Bukowski's only child, Marina Louise Bukowski, was born. It was not enough to calm him down, but he did find regular work in 1967, writing a regular column titled Notes of a Dirty Old Man for a paper called Open City. The column was later adopted by Los Angeles Free Press. And in 1969, John Martin offered Bukowski $100 per month to write full-time, an amount that would translate to just shy of $900 today. Martin called Bukowski the new Walt Whitman. This was the beginning of Bukowski as a professional writer. His life would reach a new low point in 1977, when he found himself in St. Joseph, Missouri, to film a cameo in a movie called Supervan. The movie itself has become something of a cult classic, but no one should ever have to visit St. Joe. Bukowski's visit marks the second best thing to ever happen to St. Joe, just behind being the birthplace of Marshall Mathers, a man who is himself best known for a bit role in the 2001 movie The Wash, and just ahead of being host to the Kansas City Chiefs' yearly training camp. Fourth on that list is a 1987 occurrence known simply as The Event, in which a Labrador stood on its hind legs and took 7 consecutive steps, as reported to the local media by one Shirley Meredith, who was later arraigned for shoplifting, which is generally accepted as the 6th biggest event in St. Joseph history. All told, Bukowski wrote more than 5,000 poems, hundreds of short stories, and 6 novels. In 1993, Charles Bukowski was diagnosed with leukemia, and on March 9th, 1994, he died. And what kind of poetry did Charles Bukowski write? Well, he's often kind of referred to as a beatnik. Well, what are the beatniks? This from poetryfoundation.org. Beat poets sought to write in an authentic, unfettered style. First thought, best thought was how Central Beat poet Allen Ginsberg described their method of spontaneous writing. Poetically experimental and politically dissident, the Beat poets expanded their consciousness through explorations of hallucinogenic drugs, sexual freedom, Eastern religion, and the natural world. They took inspiration from jazz musicians, surrealists, metaphysical poets, visionary poets such as William Blake, and haiku and Zen poetry. In his article, Driving the Beat Road, Jeff Weiss explains, more than a half-century after their emergence, the Beats still offer up wild style, a sense of freedom, and wonder for the natural world almost unrivaled in post-war literature. And I think that there is another school of poetry that deserves consideration when trying to classify Charles Bukowski's work, that being confessional poetry. This from poets.org. Confessional poetry is the poetry of the personal or I. This style of writing emerged in the late 1950s and early 1960s and is associated with poets such as Robert Lowell, Sylvia Plath, Anne Sexton, and W. D. Snodgrass. Lowell's book, Life Studies, was a highly personal account of his life and familial ties and had a significant impact on American poetry. Plath and Sexton were both students of Lowell and noted that his work influenced their own writing. There's a bluebird in my heart that wants to get out, but I'm too tough for him. I say, stay in there. I'm not going to let anybody see you. There's a bluebird in my heart that wants to get out, but I pour whiskey on him and inhale cigarette smoke. And the whores and the bartenders and the grocery clerks never know that he's in there. There's a bluebird in my heart that wants to get out, but I'm too tough for him. I say, stay down. Do you want to mess me up? You want to screw up the works? You want to blow my book sales in Europe? There's a bluebird in my heart that wants to get out, but I'm too clever. I only let him out at night sometimes, when everybody's asleep. I say, I know you're there, so don't be sad. Then I put him back, but he's singing a little in there. I haven't quite let him die, and we sleep together like that, with our secret pact, and it's nice enough to make a man weep, but I don't weep. Do you? So, this poem is my second favorite poem of all time. I love this poem. I love this poem for many reasons. I think that this is also one of the purest looks that we get at Charles Bukowski in all of his poetry. This is a poem that sort of strikes home for me, right? Um, but here's one of the things that I think is maybe necessary to remember in order to really get a whole lot out of this poem. Poetry is judgment. Just like everything is judgment, poetry is judgment. If you read The Flea by John Donne, you were being invited into that poem to judge that young lady who's refusing to do the hubba hubba. Now, the artistic twist here is that how you judge that young lady tells you something about you, right? That's kind of the key mechanism, what makes literature literature as opposed to propaganda. But it doesn't have to be people, it can be things as well. The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost invites you in to the poem and begs you, hey, judge between these two paths. There is something there for you. You just have to do the discernment yourself. All poetry is like that when you really get down to it. You were being invited into the poem to judge something. Now, you're being invited into the poem through the speaker. The speaker sort of hand in hand with the writer, right? Doesn't have to be the same thing, the same person as the writer, but it's that mechanism there that the writer is employing in order to get you into the poem. And you are given the speaker's point of view. That's how poetry works. In The Flea, we are looking at the flea to judge that woman. In the road, the road less traveled, we are being invited into the poem to look at these two paths and sort of discern between the two of them. We are given the speaker's point of view. The really interesting thing about Charles Bukowski is this. Charles Bukowski invites you into the poem the very same way, but you're being invited into the poem to judge the big guy. You're being invited into the poem in order to pass judgment on the speaker himself, perhaps the writer himself, if you do believe that Bukowski's poetry is confessionalist poetry. So, being invited into this poem in order to judge not the bluebird. No. You're being invited into this poem to judge the tough guy. I say, stay in there. I'm not going to let anybody see you. You're being invited into this poem to judge that guy. There's a bluebird in my heart. We're not here to judge him. That wants to get out. We're not here to judge that. But I'm too tough for him. We're here to judge that. And how do you know that that's what you're here to judge? Well, when we get to the very end of the poem, the only thing that we have is that tough guy questioning us. The tough guy in this poem turns the judgment back around at us. It's nice enough to make a man weep, but I don't weep. Do you? I'm no sissy. Are you? The implication here that he's no weak man is more evidence, in fact, that he is, because if he wasn't, he wouldn't have to remind you, right? So we're being invited into this poem to judge the guy who is the tough guy. There's a bluebird in my heart, but I'm too tough for him. We're here to judge that guy. But look, we all wear that mask sometimes, don't we? We all have these moments where we have to be the tough guy. People in our lives with whom we must be the rock. We all have those people. We all have those moments. We all have those places. Sometimes, whether or not you're wearing the tough guy mask depends completely on where you are. You are in a parking lot with your girlfriend and somebody cuts you off. You've got a decision to make. Are you the tough guy, or are you just going to find the next parking spot? You're in the same parking lot with your girlfriend, and someone pats her on the butt. This is a different situation. There might be other parking spots, but that butt isn't anyone else's. You have to put on the tough guy face. We all have moments, places, times, relationships in which we have to put on the tough guy face. So, by inviting us into the poem in this way, to judge him, to judge the tough guy, to judge that facade, by inviting us into the poem in that way, what we're doing is seeing how ridiculous that tough guy really is. You've got a bluebird in your heart and you just keep him caged up. You swallow cigarette smoke and booze. Is that really all that tough to do? Are you really all that tough if you have to cage up a bluebird? We're meant to ask those questions in this poem, I think. And I think whether you're on the side of this is a real tough guy or not, what you have to do thereafter, once you make that decision, is this a tough guy? Is this a fake tough guy? Is this a guy who has to be tough in the moment? What's going on here? What's the mechanism under this poem? Once you make that decision, you are tempted to look at yourself. You're invited to look at yourself. That next time you put on the tough guy mask, well, do you look as ridiculous as the speaker here does? As does the speaker here? Do you do something so absolutely insane as cage up the bluebird that is in your heart? That bluebird sure seems very difficult to kill. So when you think that bluebird's gone, when you think that bluebird is dead, this poem is reminding you, no, our speaker here has done quite a bit to that bluebird, and that bluebird still sings. Yours will too. You have to hear it. So this idea of inviting us into the poem in order to judge the speaker, judge the tough guy for doing something that is really not quite so tough, it's just mean-spirited, keeping that caged bird inside his chest all smothered down. We are left to come into the poem and recognize ourselves. Come into the poem and say, look, sometimes I put on that tough guy face when I don't have to. Sometimes when I put on that tough guy face, I look every bit as ridiculous as the speaker here looks. And if we recognize that, how ridiculous this speaker looks, and the only person he's really punishing is himself by refusing to live life, maybe, just maybe, we will remember to live our lives at least a little bit. But I won't live my life. Will you? That is all I have for this poetry discussion. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos every single week. There's poetry every Monday, and I hope to have you back for the next one.